The most dangerous betrayal is never spoken out loud. It always smiles first. Crystal chandeliers bathed the grand ballroom in warm golden light as nearly 300 guests celebrated another record-breaking year for Walker Capital. Laughter drifted across polished marble floors. Crystal glasses reflected soft music. Every conversation sounded confident, effortless, successful. Ethan Walker moved through the crowd with the calm assurance of a man who had spent 2 decades building one of the most respected investment firms in America. At 44 years old, he had become the face of discipline, patience, and extraordinary business judgment. Around him stood governors, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and lifelong business partners, each eager to shake his hand or share another congratulatory toast. Among them was the one man Ethan trusted without question, his closest friend for nearly 15 years, a trusted executive who had stood beside him through every major milestone. Their friendship had become legendary inside the company. Many employees quietly believed that nothing could ever separate the two men. Across the ballroom, servers moved gracefully between tables carrying silver trays of coffee and desserts. None of the guests paid much attention to the young waitress wearing a neatly pressed black apron over a simple white blouse. Claire Bennett had worked enough private events to know that the most important conversations rarely happened on the stage. They happened between whispered sentences, lingering handshakes, and glances exchanged when people believed no one was watching. She never searched for secrets. She simply noticed details others ignored. As she approached Ethan's table carrying a fresh cup of coffee, she caught something that made her heartbeat pause for just a moment. The trusted executive sitting beside Ethan exchanged a nearly invisible nod with another guest across the room. Seconds later, a cellular phone disappeared beneath the table. A brief message was typed without anyone seeming to notice. Claire had seen that exact sequence of gestures once before during another private corporate dinner months earlier. At the time, she had dismissed it as coincidence. Tonight it felt different. She gently placed the coffee beside Ethan without interrupting the conversation. As she leaned forward, her voice remained almost silent, barely louder than a breath. "Your enemy is sitting beside your best friend." Then she stepped away as naturally as if she had simply wished him an enjoyable evening. Ethan never turned his head. He never looked surprised. He simply lifted the coffee cup and thanked her politely. To everyone else in the ballroom, nothing unusual had happened. The music continued. Glasses touched in celebration. Smiles filled the room. Yet beneath Ethan's calm expression, one quiet sentence had already changed the course of the entire night. Claire Bennett moved quietly through the ballroom as though she had never spoken a single extraordinary word. She refilled glasses, collected empty plates, and smiled politely whenever guests thanked her. No one noticed that only seconds earlier she had delivered a warning capable of changing an empire. That was exactly how she preferred it. During 4 years of serving private corporate events, Claire had discovered that people revealed far more through silence than conversation. Powerful executives often believed servers became invisible the moment they picked up a tray. They lowered their voices but never enough. They exchanged meaningful glances, subtle nods, and brief expressions that disappeared before anyone sitting at the table could recognize them. Claire had never considered herself clever. She simply paid attention. Ethan Walker, meanwhile, continued the dinner exactly as planned. He laughed at familiar stories, accepted congratulations, and thanked every guest for supporting another successful year. If anyone studied his face, they would have seen nothing unusual. Only Ethan knew that every movement around the table had suddenly become meaningful. He casually lifted his coffee and looked across the ballroom without appearing to search for anyone. The trusted executive sitting beside him remained relaxed, smiling comfortably while discussing future investments with several board members. Nothing about his behavior suggested dishonesty. That was precisely what troubled Ethan. Claire had not looked frightened when she whispered her warning. She had looked completely certain. A few minutes later, the orchestra paused while the evening host invited Ethan to address the audience. Applause echoed across the ballroom as Ethan stepped onto the stage beneath crystal chandeliers. He delivered the speech everyone expected, thanking employees, investors, and longtime friends whose loyalty had helped build Walker Capital into a respected institution. As he spoke, his eyes briefly settled on the front table where his closest friend applauded with genuine enthusiasm. Across the room, Claire quietly placed fresh coffee before another guest. She never looked toward the stage. Her attention remained on her work, yet she noticed another small detail through the reflection in a polished serving tray. The same executive discreetly checked his cellular phone immediately after Ethan mentioned an upcoming confidential international expansion. The screen illuminated for only an instant before disappearing beneath the tablecloth. Claire felt the same uneasy certainty growing stronger. Ethan finished speaking and returned to his seat with calm confidence. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, he made one silent decision. He would not confront anyone. He would not accuse anyone. Before this night ended, he would discover whether the warning had been born from simple coincidence or from a truth that only one quiet waitress had been willing to see. The celebration continued well into the evening, but Ethan Walker had already stopped listening to the conversations around him. Every laugh, every handshake, and every cheerful promise now carried a different weight. Years of experience had taught him that successful leaders never acted on suspicion alone. They acted on evidence. That single whispered warning had not convinced him that someone had betrayed his trust. It had convinced him to start paying attention. As the final guests prepared to leave, Ethan warmly thanked his longtime friend for another successful event. The man smiled naturally and spoke about their meeting with international investors scheduled for the following week. Nothing about his voice sounded forced. Nothing about his expression suggested hidden motives. Ethan responded exactly as he always would, maintaining the easy confidence of a lifelong friendship. Only one thing changed. Quietly, without allowing anyone to notice, he made a decision that would test every relationship inside his company. Later that night, after returning to his penthouse overlooking the city skyline, Ethan entered his private office. The room was silent except for the soft ticking of an old Swiss watch resting beside framed photographs from the earliest days of Walker Capital. He opened a secure notebook and carefully outlined a simple plan. The following morning he would announce a confidential investment opportunity involving a fictional acquisition in Colorado valued at nearly $800 million. The project did not exist. Every financial projection, legal document, and timeline would be professionally prepared, but the information itself would be entirely false. Most importantly, only one person would receive every detail. Ethan looked out across the city lights before closing the notebook. He felt no satisfaction in what he was about to do. Trust had taken years to build. Testing it felt deeply uncomfortable. Early the next morning, his trusted friend arrived at headquarters exactly as scheduled. Ethan welcomed him into his office, closed the door, and shared the confidential proposal with complete seriousness. He emphasized that no one else inside the company knew about the opportunity and asked him to keep every detail strictly private until negotiations officially began. His friend agreed without hesitation, expressing both enthusiasm and complete discretion. After the meeting ended, Ethan remained alone for several minutes. He glanced once more at the Swiss watch before placing it back on his wrist. Time would reveal what conversation never could. Across town, Claire Bennett began another ordinary shift at the restaurant, greeting customers with her usual quiet smile. She had no idea what Ethan had chosen to do after leaving the ballroom. She only hoped that if her instincts had been correct, the truth would reveal itself without destroying the goodness that still remained inside the people involved. 2 days passed without anything unusual happening. Ethan Walker almost began questioning whether he had allowed a single whispered sentence to influence his judgment too much. Business continued at its usual pace. Meetings filled the calendar. Investors reviewed quarterly reports. The fictional Colorado acquisition remained locked inside one confidential file that only 2 people had ever discussed. Ethan never mentioned it again. He simply waited. Patience had built his fortune long before ambition ever had. On the evening of the third day, Ethan attended a private charity reception hosted at a downtown museum. While speaking with a longtime investor, he overheard two executives from another financial firm discussing an unexpected rumor. They lowered their voices, believing no one nearby could hear them. "Walker Capital is making a major move in Colorado," one of them quietly said. "Someone inside the company confirmed it yesterday." Ethan continued smiling through his conversation without showing the slightest reaction. Inside, however, every word settled heavily. The project did not exist. The information had never appeared in any official document. No employee had been briefed. Only one trusted friend possessed every detail. Ethan excused himself politely and stepped onto the museum terrace overlooking the city lights. Cool evening air replaced the warmth of the crowded ballroom inside. He removed his father's Swiss watch from beneath his jacket sleeve and watched the second hand move steadily around the dial. Time had answered the question that suspicion never could. Still, he refused to jump to conclusions. Rumors could travel in unexpected ways, and responsible leadership demanded certainty rather than emotion. The following morning, Ethan instructed his chief technology officer to conduct a discreet review of communication logs surrounding the confidential project. He requested only factual timelines without reading personal messages or violating anyone's privacy. Hours later, a simple report arrived. Less than 30 minutes after the private meeting in Ethan's office, a secure company device assigned to his closest friend had connected with an outside business contact who had no legitimate reason to know anything about the supposed acquisition. The report contained no accusations. Only timestamps. Only connections. Only facts. Ethan closed the file slowly and looked out the office window toward the morning sunlight reflecting across the skyline. Across town, Claire Bennett prepared fresh coffee for customers beginning another ordinary workday. She smiled warmly at an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary and patiently listened as a young student spoke nervously about an upcoming interview. She remained completely unaware that the quiet warning she had offered during one elegant dinner had now become the first thread leading Ethan toward a truth hidden beneath years of unquestioned loyalty. The report remained on Ethan Walker's desk long after everyone else had left the office. He read every line again, searching for another explanation that would preserve 15 years of friendship. None appeared. The communication records revealed only a sequence of verified facts. A confidential meeting had ended. Less than 30 minutes later, an outside contact connected to a competing investment firm received a secure communication from the company device assigned to the one person Ethan had trusted without hesitation. There were no dramatic confessions. No emotional messages. Only quiet evidence that refused to disappear. Ethan closed the folder and looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows as evening settled over the city. He realized the greatest challenge before him was no longer discovering the truth. It was deciding what kind of leader he wanted to become after finding it. The next morning, he authorized an independent compliance review conducted by an outside legal firm with no previous relationship to Walker Capital. Every investigator received the same instruction. Follow facts, not assumptions. Protect every employee. Reach conclusions only when supported by evidence. Days passed as documents, communication logs, and financial timelines were carefully examined. Ethan never confronted his friend. He never hinted that an investigation had begun. He continued attending meetings, discussing future projects, and treating everyone with the same respect they had always received. Across town, Claire Bennett continued serving breakfast and afternoon coffee without knowing that events had moved far beyond a single whispered warning. One rainy afternoon, the trusted executive unexpectedly entered the restaurant for a business lunch with two unfamiliar guests. Claire recognized him immediately but remained completely professional. As she approached the table carrying menus, she noticed the elegant Swiss watch resting on his wrist. For a brief moment she paused. It was identical to the watch she had noticed reflected in a polished serving tray during the charity reception several days earlier. The same deep blue dial. The same distinctive silver bezel. The same uncommon leather strap. She quietly served coffee before returning to the counter. Hours later, Ethan stopped by the restaurant after another exhausting day of meetings. Claire politely greeted him before hesitating for only a second. "I may have remembered something else," she said softly. She described the watch without exaggeration, explaining that she had seen it twice during moments that had quietly troubled her. Ethan listened carefully without interrupting. He thanked her sincerely but asked no further questions. As he walked back toward the door, one thought remained clear in his mind. Sometimes the smallest details did not prove the truth by themselves. They simply illuminated the path that made the truth impossible to ignore. 3 weeks after the independent review began, the outside investigators requested a private meeting with Ethan Walker. They arrived carrying several organized binders rather than dramatic accusations. Every conclusion had been supported by documented timelines, communication records, compliance reports, and verified business transactions. Ethan listened quietly as the lead investigator explained that confidential company information had repeatedly reached outside contacts through indirect channels connected to a small group of executives. No single document proved intentional wrongdoing by itself, but together the evidence revealed a consistent pattern that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. The trusted friend Ethan had admired for years appeared repeatedly at the center of those connections. Ethan remained silent after the presentation ended. He thanked the investigators for their professionalism and asked only one question. "Can every conclusion in this report withstand independent review?" The lead investigator nodded without hesitation. "Every statement is supported by verifiable evidence." Ethan slowly closed the final binder and rested his hand on the familiar Swiss watch around his wrist. The weight he felt was not anger. It was disappointment. Across town, Claire Bennett continued living exactly as she always had. She greeted regular customers by name, remembered favorite coffee orders, and quietly helped an elderly gentleman carry his breakfast to a nearby table after noticing his hands trembling slightly. Her kindness never depended on whether anyone noticed. That afternoon, Ethan stopped by the restaurant without calling ahead. Claire recognized him immediately and prepared his usual coffee before he reached the counter. He thanked her with a gentle smile and took his seat near the window overlooking the busy street. After several quiet moments, he spoke softly. "The investigation found what I was afraid it would find." Claire did not ask for details. She simply listened. Ethan looked out the window as people hurried through the afternoon sunlight. "I kept hoping I was wrong." Claire placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him before answering. "Sometimes the hardest truth is not discovering that someone disappointed us. It is accepting that we ignored the quiet signs because we wanted the story to end differently." Ethan looked at her with thoughtful appreciation. She had never claimed certainty. She had never asked to be believed. She had simply spoken when her conscience would not allow silence. As he left the restaurant, Ethan realized his next decision would define his leadership far more than uncovering the betrayal itself. The truth had finally revealed itself. Now integrity would determine what happened. Next. The quarterly board meeting began exactly at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. Every executive took a familiar seat around the long walnut conference table overlooking the city skyline. Coffee steamed quietly beside neatly arranged financial reports while sunlight filled the room through floor-to-ceiling windows. No one sensed that this meeting would become the most important moment in the history of Walker Capital. Ethan Walker entered without security or ceremony, carrying only a thin leather folder and wearing the same calm expression that had guided the company for years. He greeted every executive with genuine courtesy, including the friend who had shared countless victories beside him. Once everyone settled into silence, Ethan thanked the leadership team for their years of dedication before placing the folder in the center of the table. "Before we discuss future investments," he said calmly, "there is something more important we need to address." No one spoke. Ethan slowly opened the folder and displayed a carefully organized timeline prepared by the independent investigators. There were no dramatic photographs, no emotional accusations, and no raised voices. Each page contained only verified dates, documented communications, and independently confirmed findings. He walked the room through the evidence one step at a time, allowing every person to read each document before continuing to the next. The atmosphere gradually changed. Confident expressions became thoughtful. Casual smiles disappeared. The trusted executive remained remarkably composed, though he no longer met Ethan's eyes. When the final document had been reviewed, Ethan quietly closed the folder. "Today is not about humiliation," he said. "It is about accountability. Loyalty without integrity is not loyalty at all." The room remained completely silent. Several board members lowered their eyes toward the table, recognizing mistakes they had overlooked for years. Others appeared deeply saddened by the realization that personal trust had quietly replaced healthy oversight. Ethan looked toward his longtime friend with genuine disappointment rather than anger. "You were given every opportunity to protect this company," he said softly. "Instead, you protected information that should never have left this room." His friend slowly nodded. There was no argument. No attempt to deny the documented facts. Only quiet acceptance that the evidence spoke more clearly than any explanation could. Ethan then announced a series of governance reforms, stronger compliance protections, anonymous reporting channels, and independent oversight for sensitive decisions. Every change focused on preventing future failures rather than punishing past ones. As the meeting ended, the board members rose in complete silence. Many later admitted they expected outrage that morning. Instead, they witnessed something far more powerful. They watched a leader choose integrity over pride, and in doing so, restore confidence without ever raising his voice. 1 week after the board meeting, Walker Capital felt different in ways that could not be measured by quarterly reports or market value. The atmosphere inside the headquarters had quietly changed. Employees who had once remained silent during difficult conversations now felt comfortable asking thoughtful questions. Department leaders spent more time listening than speaking. Anonymous ethics reports, once rarely used, became valuable tools for improving daily operations rather than symbols of distrust. Ethan Walker walked through the office each morning without announcing his arrival, stopping to greet receptionists, interns, assistants, and analysts with the same respect he had once reserved only for senior executives. The company had not simply survived a difficult chapter. It had learned from it. Late Friday afternoon, Ethan found himself standing once again outside the familiar restaurant where everything had quietly begun. Through the front window, he saw Claire Bennett arranging coffee cups behind the counter exactly as she had every other day. Nothing about her routine suggested she expected recognition or reward. She greeted every customer with the same gentle smile, whether they wore expensive business suits or well-worn work jackets. Ethan waited until the lunch crowd had faded before stepping inside. Claire looked up, recognized him immediately, and smiled warmly. "Your usual coffee?" she asked. Ethan nodded with quiet appreciation. She prepared it without ceremony and placed the warm cup before him near the same window where they had spoken several times before. After a few moments of comfortable silence, Ethan finally spoke. "The company is changing." Claire smiled softly. "That sounds like good news." Ethan looked down at the rising steam above the coffee. "It is. Not because we removed the wrong people. Because we finally created a place where the right people can be heard." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes that is the harder achievement." Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small folded note. He slid it gently across the table. Claire unfolded it and found only a single handwritten sentence. "Thank you for choosing courage when silence would have been easier." She looked back at Ethan with quiet surprise. "I did not expect anything," she said. Ethan smiled gently. "That is exactly why I wanted to thank you." Claire carefully folded the note and placed it inside the pocket of her apron instead of her purse. "It was not valuable because of the paper. It was valuable because someone had understood the reason she had spoken. Outside, the afternoon sunlight reflected across the cafe windows as people continued walking through the city without realizing that one quiet conversation between a billionaire and a waitress had already changed far more lives than either of them had ever imagined. Autumn arrived quietly, bringing cool mornings and golden leaves that gathered along the sidewalks outside the neighborhood restaurant. Months had passed since the leadership changes at Walker Capital, yet the greatest transformation could not be found inside financial statements or newspaper headlines. It lived in everyday moments. Employees spoke with greater confidence. Managers listened more carefully. New ideas were welcomed regardless of job title. Ethan Walker often reflected on how close he had come to losing something far more valuable than a successful company. He had almost lost the ability to recognize honest voices simply because they came from unexpected places. One peaceful afternoon, he returned to the restaurant carrying nothing except a familiar Swiss watch on his wrist and a quiet sense of gratitude. Claire Bennett was finishing her shift when she noticed him waiting near the window. She smiled with the same warmth she had shown on the evening they first met. Neither of them mentioned the investigation, the board meeting, or the difficult months that had followed. Some stories no longer needed words. Ethan placed a small wooden box on the table between them. Claire looked at him curiously before opening it. Inside rested an ordinary porcelain coffee cup, handcrafted by a local artisan. Across its side, a simple sentence had been carefully engraved. The quietest voice changed the loudest room. Claire traced the words with her fingertips before looking up. "This is too generous," she said softly. Ethan smiled and gently shook his head. "It is only a reminder." She closed the box carefully, understanding that the gift carried meaning rather than value. Outside, people continued walking through the afternoon without noticing the quiet exchange taking place inside the little restaurant. Life moved forward exactly as it always had. Ethan stood to leave, pausing briefly beside the door. "You reminded me that leadership begins with listening," he said. Claire answered with the same calm wisdom that had guided every conversation between them. "And listening only matters when someone has the courage to speak." Ethan stepped outside into the crisp autumn air as sunlight reflected across the cafe windows. He glanced at the Swiss watch that had measured every difficult decision since that unforgettable evening. Its steady movement reminded him that time never repaired trust by itself. Honest choices did. Behind him, Claire returned to arranging coffee cups for tomorrow morning, serving each customer with the same quiet dignity that had never changed. The city would never know her story, and she never needed it to. Because the greatest acts of courage rarely arrive with applause. They arrive as a whisper, spoken at exactly the moment when one person still has the courage to hear it.